And in the past 3 years, she's done a phenomenal job researching, bringing it back to life, and, and letting us all experience it. So let me introduce Nancy, who's going to show you pictures and tell you more about it.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Um, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my rose journey. I'm going to share some slides here. And here we go. Can you see that? Let me go
Yeah.
to the full screen. There we go. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I had been intimidated by roses, as I think a lot of people are. You hear about the funguses, the diseases, the finickiness. They need food, they need fertilizer, they get bugs. So I was never a rose person. Um, and this is what the garden looked like when I discovered it. So I live in the neighborhood. I live next door, actually. So in my walks, I would go past this old bed with the rundown bricks and the trees and the all the evidence of neglect. And one year, I noticed that there were a few roses straggling up through the weeds. And being a gardener, I thought, well, this is something that might do better with a little attention. And I have my own garden. I have kind of an unruly spot next door. I've got a little creek going through it in season, and I have a hot bed. I have a dry, shady bed. I've got a lot of problems of my own in my garden. And I think I was attracted to this because it's small, it's contained, it's bricked in, it's something that I could work on and probably do something nice with. So this is another view of what it looked like at first. You can see the bricks are run down. It's early spring. You can hardly tell where the bed ends and where the lawn begins. And I contacted Ashley, who said, "Go for it." She said, I've never met you, but thank you. Go for it. Start working on it." So the first thing we did was I started digging out the bad stuff. A lot of weeds, a lot of multiflora roses, which are sort of the thugs of the rose world. It's an invasive that takes over. There was honeysuckle, there was pachysandra, there were ferns, lily of the valley, and small trees that had to be cut down. Here I am with a multiflora rose that I dug out. And you can see the soil already looks better than it did there. Another thing that we did was we brought in lots and lots of soil and mulch from Hartwell Avenue. And Ashley was very specific. She said, "You want the November leaf mulch." And you can go to this pile in the back and get the November mulch. So we started nourishing the soil because initially there were no worms in it. It was kind of dead soil. But started looking better. And somebody turned up this map of the roses that had been planted. The garden was planted in 1985, I think, by Ned Munroe, who used to live in the tavern. He was a caretaker and a Munroe descendant who I think he was also an artist and he was a gardener. So he bought these old garden roses from Ipswich and put them in. And then another sign showed up, kind of marking where I might expect to find some roses. I also got a lot of help from Marilyn Ringowitz, who's another garden club member, and she helped with the digging and weeding. It doesn't look great here, but you can tell the soil is much, much richer and much fewer weeds. We also called in Teresa Moser from the New England Rose Society and Andy Venable, who's with the Yankee district of the American Rose Society. So they came out kind of to offer encouragement, and Andy spent about an hour digging out a tree that had been kind of in the center of this field. So they were great for encouragement and advice. Anyway, as I learned, as I worked, I learned and discovered these old what we had, these old roses. You can see a little sign there. That sign says that it's a bed of roses that were grown before 1837, I think. So these are old species roses. The pink ones you see here, the deep pink ones, are the Gallicas. That is an old, it's called a species rose. So this is one of the granddaddy rose plants that all the other ones are derived from. There are a couple of kinds of old species roses, but they're incredibly tough. As you can see, because they survived like 20 plus years of neglect. These roses were, these Gallicas, it's a Gallica officinalis. It's also known as the apothecary rose. They were probably grown in fields by the Greeks and Romans. And, you know, in Europe in the Middle Ages, these are the ones that were grown for medicinal purposes and for fragrance. They're extremely heavy in perfume. And they have long stamens, so they're great for pollinators, unlike some of the modern roses, which are so tightly whorled that, you know, the insects can hardly get in them. These are like kind of a wide open flower. There's another one.
There's the wide open flower.
Yeah, and long yellow stamens,
Yeah.
so easily pollinated.
Yep.
These Gallicas were the favorite of Josephine Bonaparte, who, after Napoleon divorced her because she couldn't have children, he had to have children. So he divorced her, but he gave her Malmaison, which is her chateau in France. And she was quite a horticulturalist. She was from somewhere in the Caribbean. I forget where, Martinique maybe.
Martinique.
Martinique?
Yeah, I think it's Martinique.
Yeah, so she devoted her life to botany after she was divorced. She lived there, she collected and bred about 250 varieties of roses, and about half of them were Gallicas, different types of Gallicas. And you can see how big the bloom is, big and wide open. And we have two new species in the garden that have not bloomed yet. One is a Tuscany Superb, which is one of the oldest Gallicas, and then a Charles de Mills, which was named after a merchant in the Dutch East India Company, which suggests that it was bred around, when would the Dutch East India Company have been, 1700s?
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. So, and the rose in medieval history. So another rose that we have are the Spinosissima. This is a single blossomed Spinosissima. It's really lovely, very, very lush, very fragrant. Again, the long stamens, only 5 petals, like the officinalis. This one has tiny little leaves. It's called Spinosissima because it is the most spiny. They have the most spines of any. This year, we had another kind of Spinosissima bloom. This is a double Spinosissima, so it's, again, super fragrant, and it just, you know, many more petals. This is a rose that probably originated in Turkey. A lot of these roses were brought up to Europe during the Middle Ages by the Crusades from Syria, Greece, Egypt.
Wow.
And that's the double Spinosissima.
That's beautiful.
Is it pretty? Another rose that we have is the damask. We think this one is an Ispahan. It's also known as the Rose of Castile. Damask because it would have come from Damascus in Syria. These are probably the most fragrant of the roses. In fact, they say that they weigh an ounce more in the morning than in the evening because they shed fragrance throughout the day. So they're
Oh,
carrying
oh,
a heavy load of perfume. Oh, where's Yeah. So this is probably a damask. This is a tiny picture, but what you see here is a picture by Alma Tadema called The Banquet of Elagobulus. I think I'm saying that right. Elagobulus. So these are probably damask roses in a scene of a Greek festival or a Greek party where they had a false ceiling. It shows us a scene at a party where they had a false ceiling and they filled that area with roses. And sometime during the banquet, they dropped them all down just as a sign of opulence and wealth and celebration. And the story from this banquet is that there were so many roses that some of the guests were smothered by the blossoms. Unintended consequence. One of these, and I think it's this one, is an alba. This is another class of old species or old garden roses. This is the smallest class. Again, they go back to the Middle Ages. They're very, very fragrant. And you can see they kind of, like this one, it looks like the roses that you see in those old master paintings. They're just beautiful. The alba were the roses that were adopted. They come in different colors, and they were adopted by the houses of York and the houses of Lancaster.
oh,
The
yeah.
house of what was it? York had the white rose, and the house of Lancaster had the red rose. So the War of the Roses was this battle between the red roses and the white roses. And I guess after the war was over, they developed something called the Tudor rose. And there's another one that was in the garden that's called the York and Lancaster, and it's both red and white, kind of veined. That one we don't have anymore unless it pops up one of these years. But this is, they're really pretty easy to grow. That one has a really beautiful shape, not a great shot, and we're continuing to work on the bed. I'm really excited this year by the improvement in that brick border and the lawn. Nice straight edge there. And I thought I would show this. This is the New England Rose Society giving us support and information, or the American Rose Society. This site in particular has a lot of connections. You can find a rosarian, you can shop for roses, you can learn about taking care of roses, planting roses, how to cut them, how to feed them, anything you want. All right.
Thank you, Nancy.
That's beautiful rose. Yeah.
That's lovely. They're lovely pictures, and I love the way you rattle off the names.
There's
say the one that starts with S again. Spinosolulosis.
Spinosissima is the many spined one, and it really does. And that slide in the beginning where I'm holding up one of the hazards we faced was, you go into prune and you're faced with something like this. There are some roses that don't have spines, but this one has maximum spines.
Maximum, really sharp.
Yeah, it should be Spino maxima,
Yeah.
not Spinosissima. It sounds so cute. So right now we just have the two kinds blooming. We have the single and the double Spinosissima. Also known as
Yeah.
Dutch rose.
That's great. Well, we have one question right now, and we can certainly entertain a few more from Kavita. Can we go visit this rose garden, and where is this exactly? If you're in Lexington, it's on Mass Avenue as you head down towards Arlington. It's not very far from our center. You look up Munroe Tavern, which is a Lexington Historical Society site. It is now the Museum of British History. Since the 1980s, we've had two gardeners who've been working in gardens over there. One, as I said, is the native plant garden, and another one is the Garden of Colonial Flowers, and they are lovely. I have one friend in the garden club who says she always takes her visitors to visit at Munroe Tavern to see what's going on. And the third one, now thanks to Nancy's work, is this rose garden, which has really come to life. And I must say, made it for an exciting year to have a new garden in the garden club. We don't have any land that we own, but we work the land over there. And we got a grant from the garden club and to smooth and make the more accessible, easier to walk around there. And so that was great. So you can go visit this rose garden anytime. It is open to the public. There's no gate. There's no admission. You can just see. If you're lucky, you might meet Nancy.
Yeah, these old roses only bloom once a year. There's sort of a rotating show. The first ones are the spinosissima, and then I think the Gallica will pop out, and then the other ones. So beginning June, throughout June, maybe into July, there'll be blossoms there. And the rest of the year, you'll just see the bed. It's unlike these new hybridized roses, since 1837. They bloom and bloom again. But many of them have lost the fragrance and the toughness of these old roses.
Right. Yeah.
Some of them don't have any fragrance. They might repeat bloom, but they don't have that heady perfume of these old ones.
That you want to use to
And
make
they're also
potpourri.
less disease resistant. These older roses apparently have kind of a waxy coating on their leaves, which for some reason hasn't carried over into the modern hybrids. And that seems to protect them from the fungus that a lot of modern roses get. That black spot and that fungus.
Oh, we already have our winners on the two plants. Congratulations, Anita and Jill. And do you want to show which rose it is they're getting?
Yeah, this is the two of the Gallica. We'll go back. This one.
The one with long stamens, and they're good for the pollinators. That'll be great.
Shrub. They set big hips, at the end of the season, and they propagate by both seeds and runners. So it's a really vigorous plant.
So you will be having babies too.
The ones I dug up were taking over one of the spinosissima.
What we have figured out, and Nancy will correspond with you, is that you will meet her over at Munroe Tavern to pick up the roses. That way you'll get to see Munroe too if you haven't gone. Nancy, here's another question. Did you introduce worms? And if so, where did you get them?
You know, I did not. I brought in composted topsoil from Hartwell, and I brought in the leaf mulch, and I think the worms just found it. I didn't do any fertilizing. I just enriched the soil. I think I might have spread some lime at one point because it had it seemed to need that. Otherwise, what I'm doing now to feed it is somebody told me that a rose is like a mix. It kind of sounds like a breakfast mix. It's banana peel, coffee ground, and eggshell. So I find it as breakfast for the roses, and I'm not sure what all is in there. I guess bananas must have potassium and eggshells calcium.
They also keep away the slugs.
Yeah.
Because if the slugs eat them, they chokes them.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to know.
What was the third one? I didn't hear the third thing.
Oh, banana, coffee grounds, and eggshells.
Coffee grounds the same as banana. I'm one who puts banana peels on my roses. And they bloom, bloom, and bloom, and bloom for me. Luckily, the bananas go black very quickly, so you can't see them.
Yeah.
It's a good way of handling it.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, so far I haven't had to do any pest control, any weed control. We do some cleaning out, but and I think things like Pachysandra and Lily of the Valley, they're pretty persistent. I'll probably be digging those up for years and years, but they're,
Yes, you will be.
the roses fought them off without me for a long time, and I think that they'll continue to
Okay.
hold their own.
Can you go to Hartwell if you're not a resident? Unfortunately, no. Hartwell is only for Lexington residents. And I should tell you all, he greeted me the other day and said, "You're talking too much about gardening. We ran out of topsoil for the residents." The place
Oh.
is empty. He did fill it up again today, but they are really keeping all non-residents out of there. So unfortunately, that's not a place for you to go. Now, Linda asked, what is the best spray for roses with holes in the leaves? First, I've got to figure out why the holes. That's not Japanese beetles. That's not black spot. That's probably powdery mildew. Maybe not.
Or it could be something eating them. Caterpillar or
Yeah, that could be. Well, the first thing you usually start with on roses is warm soapy water and try to wash them off that way. You avoid overhead watering because that can bring on black spot, which is a problem. And powdery mildew is the most serious of the diseases of the roses. If the holes keep up, I would take a piece of the leaf over to New England Nursery over in Bedford and ask them what they think. They're very wise. I can't recommend sprays here on TV because we're just garden club people. We're not experts on those fungicides and everything else. So I would definitely ask them since they're more the experts. The nice thing about Japanese beetles is that you can pick them off. They used to be an enormous problem. And at one point we all had little containers that would lure the Japanese beetles and they would all die in there. But what happened is those containers were bringing all the Japanese beetles from all over the neighborhood. So you were overwhelmed with Japanese beetles. Okay, will you be discussing the best location for planting roses and pruning suggestions?
they need a lot of sun. They can't have too much sun, so just make sure that it's a well-drained area with a lot of sun. Although there are roses that are not very fussy about drainage. The beach roses, the Rosa rugosa, will grow in all kinds of soil. That's the rose that you would see in the center strip of a highway. You see it on the beach, and those aren't picky at all. But I think invariably they want a good 6 hours of sun a day.
Right.
And that also helps them fight off mildew.
I looked it up and it said roses require 8 hours of morning sun or 6 hours of afternoon sun. They grow best in well-balanced soil, rich in organic matter, with good drainage, and prefer slightly acidic soil with a pH of 5.5 to 7. Rose roots will rot in wet soil, but they need an inch of water a week. Why I keep pushing rain gauges. Hopefully that does it. Oh, now you wanted pruning suggestions. When I started growing roses, my husband went to a tutorial at Lexington Gardens. Those of you who've been around in town will remember Lexington Gardens. And they said, if you don't cut your roses back in the fall, it is time to do it when the forsythia blooms. So the minute he sees forsythia blooming, he's out there pruning the roses and figures that's the time to do that. And then you remove the mulch that you've surrounded the rose with over the winter and scratch in organic fertilizer around the drip line as appropriate. People do cut back the roses in the fall because they don't like the way it looks. The branch is just sticking out there, like doing the cold. It doesn't seem to hurt them. But remember the line when the forsythia blooms, which is a good way of doing it. There is a couple of books I found that are new, and the library is going to be opening up one of these days. And you can find them there. Roses for New England, a guide to sustainable rose gardening. It's the first how-to book published by New England rose gardeners. for New England rose gardeners. It explains everything you need to know to grow wonderful roses, whether you're a novice or a serious seasoned rose gardener. And it includes 6 easy steps, which is nice. Is it too late to prune now? Should I wait until fall?
Well, you should always cut off anything that's dead or diseased, so that can go on anytime. Most roses are pretty tolerant of pruning. I would say if you've got a branch that's shooting off on its own and leaving the rest of the shrub behind, bring it in.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can take them down a little bit.
Yeah.
It's just that you're not supposed to do it back in March when it's still too cold before the forsythia has bloomed, because then you can really let in a lot of freezing air into that rose with an open sore.
Yeah.
Nancy's rolling her eyes.
Well, and then I'm thinking what'll happen is that any new shoots are going to be tender, and if you get another freeze, they won't survive. So you don't want to encourage any new growth until it's safe.
Okay, I'll put the name of the book.
Now, the old roses are different. You don't prune them. You take away anything dead or diseased, but they bloom on the old wood. So that's something we constantly had to restrain from doing, pruning them back, because your instinct is to cut them down to, a tidy little shrub in the spring, so you'll get something bushy, but these are more unruly looking.
Yeah, like a tea rose. I always think of tea roses as being kind of small, like these double knockout roses that people are buying right and left.
Yeah.
Easy to grow beach plum. Oh, I don't know about beach plum. Beach roses.
Beach roses, probably.
Beach rose. New England gardeners sort of said beach roses are fast-growing bushes that spread quickly and are covered with constantly blooming pink and white flowers. They thrive in almost all soil types, from sandy beaches to the roadside fences, just like Nancy said. Once planted, they require very little attention, making one of them the easiest roses to grow anywhere. So that sounds ideal. They're not the prettiest of roses. So they're not like your climbing rose. I have arbor roses in my driveway and everybody oohs and ahs, they bloom. Or tea roses, which are gorgeous, but they're in constant bloom. I will put the name of the book in the chat. And let me see. Do we have any other questions?
I also discovered a guy. There's a guy who has a series of YouTube tutorials and on pruning and planting and all things roses from a place called Fraser Valley Rose Farms in British Columbia.
Oh, well, that would be, out there. That's beautiful rose territory.
Yeah, he's sounded like he's been doing it for a while. He's a guy who retired from something else and devoted himself to starting his own nursery and rose garden business now.
Yeah.
But that was a really great resource.
Okay. We have no more open questions. We're going to just talk about all the rose problems in a moment.
Actually, Ashley,
Yeah.
did you have what was the name of that book?
I wrote it out.
Oh, I didn't see it in the chat.
Oh, I just put it in chat. Didn't it go? Well, the name of the book, maybe you want to do it again, is Roses for New England, a guide to sustainable rose gardening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully it went. Maybe it just went to her. One of the roses that people recommended, this magazine recommended, in addition to beach roses, were climbing roses, which is a traditional New England rose. As I said, I have them in my driveway. I have a perfect place there, except you definitely need to prune in the summer because the rose keeps growing and it's reaching out to the people who are coming into the driveway, and so they can get stuck. But it's a very breathtaking and romantic sight, and one that you've seen in New England gardeners for years. And there are dozens of climbing roses to choose from. I would talk to your local nursery for available options. And the other kind are tea roses, which were originally hybrids from China. These roses have evolved and been successfully cultivated in northeastern gardens for years, though they may require some definite mulch and protection in the winter. You've got to protect them. They will not take our winters. They are larger than most climbing roses and can be very fragrant. And they are found in many different colors. If you go over to any of our nurseries in the area, they have a lot of these rose bushes for you to look at. People seem to be getting these days the knockout. There's a double knockout, or RADTKO, and a pink double knockout, RADTKO pink. There are two outstanding examples, according to this article, of the knockout series, which showcase what landscape roses can do for the garden. Both flower from spring into the fall without any deadheading, which is lovely. What they lack in fragrance, it goes back to what Nancy was saying, they make up for in ease. These shrubs can grow to about 4 feet high and wide in a standalone bed or in a hedge, or mixed in among your perennials and other shrubs. So that's very nice. They do mention deadheading, and deadheading, like in all gardening, is really important with roses, regular roses. You've got to keep going out there and take off those deadheads so the plant doesn't keep giving its energy to the old dying bloom and comes up with a new bloom for you to please you and so forth, which would be good.
And if you want old garden roses, I mean, if you have a place in your garden for something that isn't going to bloom all the time, you just want the fragrance and the appeal of something old. Most nurseries don't carry them. You'd have to do a little research. David Austin, he's a rose breeder in England, but there are sites here in the US. He has a couple species. There's a place in Colorado that has some available. High Country Roses in Colorado. There's a breeder in New York somewhere that has them. So you need to do a little research. And there's some species that just aren't available that you can't find anymore. I've been looking for that York and Lancaster to replace the one that was missing, that seems to have been lost in the bed. And have not been able to find that anywhere. Nobody has that.
But you found these two plants that we're giving away.
Yeah.
How did that happen? So the people who got those will be able to, as I said, have babies. How does it happen? They drop it, or does it just send out a long shoot?
It'll send out runners. And that was one of the challenges of restoring this bed, is that the roses, I showed you the picture of the maps and those plot plans, and some of the roses were approximately where they were supposed to be, but some had really migrated across the bed and weren't in their original spots at all. They must have sent out runners, then maybe the parent plant died, and lo and behold, the offspring was someplace else. So the plot plans were somewhat helpful, but you could see that these roses were looking for more sun or getting away from a neighbor who was crowding them. They were moving around on their own in the bed. So these roses, back to how these propagate, they're going to send out runners, or they set seeds, and the seeds will sprout new little roses. So it'll be a nice little patch. These are also in the garden at the Hancock Clark House. I think they have an apothecary rose there.
We do.
But smaller and more vigorous. It doesn't have as much room, so it's crowded into a little bed in there.
And those of us who garden over there keep putting it back because it keeps spreading all over the herb garden. We don't want it to do that.
Yeah, but you love plants who do that. I mean, as a gardener, you want a plant that's wants to get bigger, right?
Just like kids, right?
Send out babies and is happy where it is and wants to share its energy with you.
That's right. We get energy from that.
Yeah.
Anita has asked the best way to deadhead, which is a good question. To increase and encourage growth in your plant and new flower growth, this is true for all plants, not just roses. You snip off the weak, the faded, the past peak blooms as they appear. Now, in many cases, like with the tulips and daffodils, you snip off the dead bloom, but you unfortunately leave the leaves that are going to kind of fade and go yellow and look kind of nasty at this point out there. So they continue getting nurture. They will do, eventually you can cut them all off, but when they're all yellow. But at the moment, you want them to get nurture. With roses, you do the same thing. You go down to the first joint. Roses say growing up like here, and here's the joint. You cut the rose down to there is the way I do it. How do you do it, Nancy?
I would do the same. Cut it down and don't be shy about it because they will um, it just it'll just encourage more roses farther down.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't hesitate to prune them.
And it's the same, like sometimes I don't pick my flowers and put them in a vase. If I picked them and put it in a vase, I'd probably get more flowers out there. So it's not a bad idea to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
And I don't think it hurts them not to deadhead them. It's not like perennial flowers where you really have to. I think roses will flourish more if you do, but I don't think it'll hurt the plant not to. So I think that's another thing people are often nervous about the care that roses take, and they're really much tougher than people think.
Now, you certainly couldn't deadhead those beach roses. They're constantly blooming all the time. You'd be out there all the time picking away. In the fall, you should be really careful about mulching deeply, or you can wrap the fragile new thing in burlap or cover with a box to protect them from heavy snow and ice. Of course, unless they're beach roses, or maybe the roses that Nancy's dealing with, which are pretty tough roses.
I don't do anything with them. I don't bed them down for the winter.
Yeah, just leave. So they were hardy and they can survive everything. They've come through the Crusaders all the way to here. So
some of the species range up to Iceland.
yeah, they
So
can do it.
they have a wide geographic range, so they're okay here.
Yeah, and roses do, and especially hot climates, which we're only really hot in August and July. Roses do best when they're protected from the hot afternoon sun. I think I said before, they only need 6 hours of afternoon sun. In the cold climates, planting a rose bush next to a south or west facing fence or wall can help minimize winter freeze damage. My roses in the driveway, the two arbors, are on a south facing wall. They're right up against the house, which keeps them warm, and they have the southern sun throughout the winter, and they are ready to go, and they're just about ready to burst into bloom now. Roses also thrive when planted in well-drained soil that is rich in organic matter. So that's always good to look for. I got a chat question, or is that Matt with the book? Yes, there's the
That was me with the book.
That is you with the book. And do we have any other questions? Any other things we can answer while we're here? We'll tell you more about Munroe Tavern and the gardens over there. The native plant garden is one of the big pushes from the Mass Federation to plant more native plants. And if you walk over there and go through the paths, you can see all sorts of native plants. You sometimes have to kind of push things away to look and find them, but there are many there. They are well signed, and you can find them that way. The Garden of Colonial Flowers is beautifully groomed by many hardworking volunteers, and there are signs there. They are smaller.
That's led by Chris Burton, who has been nurturing that garden along for decades.
Since the 80s, along with Joe Frey on the other garden.
Yeah, Joe Frey and the Wildflower Garden, and they've both done just a fabulous job with their respective projects. They're beautiful. I feel like the Wildflower Garden is a mini garden in the woods. It doesn't have the range, but it's the diversity of plants and shrubs and trees that she has there is just amazing.
Okay, and we have another question. Can you rattle off all those names again, Nancy? Anita wants to know, will you give us the names of the roses you used in the garden?
Yeah, the spiny one was the Spinosissima, or the Scotch rose. There's a single and a double. So those are survivors from the original bed that Ned Munroe put in. The Gallica officinalis is the one that's really vigorous and moving all over.
Is that the pink one?
Yeah, that's the apothecary rose.
Yeah.
And when I first began labeling things in the garden, in the rose bed, I decided pretty quickly that I would label the ones that were not the Gallica officinalis and just assume that everything else was the Gallica that had colonized all over, that had wandered around. And then the two new ones we have, which I'm hoping will bloom this year, are a Tuscany Superb that replaces one that was lost, and then and that's a Gallica, and another Gallica called a Charles de Mille. That's the one that was bred, we think, in the 1700s. And then we have an Alba, which is a small pink. It was one of the small pink blossoms, kind of, it's the smallest class of old garden roses. Fragrant, really beautiful. Smaller, they tend to be pink and white flowers. And then we have the damask rose, the Isfahan, which is, I think, named after Isfahan, Turkey. So that's one of the damask is the really fragrant one that goes back to probably the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians. So the one that we have, I think, is an Isfahan. That one, I think it bloomed for the first time last year, and we found it kind of trying to fight its way through the Spinosissima shrub. Noticed that there was something pink in there. So a project for this year is to try to tease it out, separate it from that Spinosissima. Probably next March. I'll do that, early spring. I'll get those gauntlet gloves and go in after it.
Is there any other rose besides the red and white, the Lancaster York rose that you want to get?
That's the last one that I want to get, and that's the one that I haven't found anywhere. David Austin doesn't have it. High Country doesn't have it. There's a guy somewhere in New York. It sounds like a funky little operation. They listed that they had it, but he didn't respond to emails, so I'll keep trying him.
Anybody likes English history, they would love that rose. I mean,
yeah. Well, and Munroe Tavern is the one that's dedicated to the history of the British in during the Revolution. So it would be a nice rose to kind of pay homage to that.
Yeah, it certainly would be.
Yeah.
It goes right along with the whole story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay. Give me
and then we have a centifolia too, which is also pink. Centifolia means hundreds of petals. That's a Dutch, bred in the 1600s by the Dutch. It's also called the cabbage rose. And that's, I guess, a hybrid of a Gallica and a damask. A little smaller blossom, but also very, very fragrant and beautiful. And that's a survivor. Kind of.
Well, these roses have survived if you look at it, except for the one. They've been there buried under trash and weeds and so forth for quite a few years until you came along and discovered them.
Yeah, I think that the garden had been neglected for probably 20 years. Yeah. So that's really a testament to the vigor of these plants.
So if anybody's sitting out there would like to come work in a rose garden, we have lots of room for volunteers in the garden club who can get their hands dirty, and you can see what it's like to actually do with all this.
Down and look, the heavy work is done. That first year was,
that's true. The heavy work is done.
It took a little bit of obsession to keep going over there and cleaning it up.
I'm sure it did, to face those thorns day after day and to do that. That would not be a nice thing to do. So with, but this is a way, being in the garden club, you get a chance to see all sorts of things and try all sorts of things you never would maybe do it at your own home and stuff.
Right.
Now, we gave away these 2 plants. Do you want to give any instructions about?
A volunteer. Yay. I'd like to help. I love the Munroe Tavern garden.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's
I didn't get that one. Where did you get that?
It's in the chat.
Okay, in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll send her a
But these, I would keep them in the pot so that, the Gallicas, keep them in the pot a little while and keep watering them so you can make sure that they're getting enough water, and don't put them in bright sun at first. Let them kind of get their roots established, and then when you plant them, make sure they have a big enough hole. You might want to protect them from too much sun at first, just because it might make them dry out. I'm one of those people who puts an umbrella over some of the plants that I've just put in so that they don't get burned initially in the garden.
And we thank you all very much for coming today. Now that it's getting nicer, it's hard to sit in and sort of do a whole program and whatever, but Nancy's done a lot of work here, and I loved her pictures, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So I do have to thank you for doing it, and sharing all your knowledge with the rest of us. And as I said, as we go through this pandemic, it's lovely to see all the beauty that you can make and create in this world, and that you can try and you can control something here. Here's something, and gardens are very forgiving, and you can keep going and keep practicing and playing with them, and they would love it. As for the woman who would like to join the garden club, I'm sending you a message. If you don't get it, contact the library, okay? They'll get me.
Yeah, and Elizabeth Piquet, I think I know you because you guide at Munroe and I volunteer at Munroe. She's offered to help with the gardens.
Yeah, that's why I was writing, save chat. I don't know how to get it back to her.
Yeah, I think as a gardener, I think we are kind of attracted by that desire to control and manage a little patch of something and make it beautiful.
I once had a minister say, he watched me weeding, and he said, what you're doing is taking the evil out one by one. It's nice that you do that. I thought, oh, well, this is interesting. That's great. Okay, I think we're about done. Matt, you have anything to add here?
No, I just thank you everyone for coming and listening. This was a fabulous talk.
Thank you, and thank you for wearing your rose shirt for us today. I just want to call out that Matt's appropriately dressed there.
I couldn't resist.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It's too bad neither one of us had something. You did it. Thank you all.
Thank